Hello, friends, and welcome back to Rarely Typical, the podcast where I am talking about living with a chronic illness, sharing hope, and hopefully making you guys feel like you are not alone in this life. Today, I want to talk about why your advocacy matters, especially when it comes to the loneliness of chronic illness and how community support can change your entire journey. If you are new here or if you are tuning in for the first time, I am Gerry Langan and I am a pulmonary arterial hypertension and congestive heart failure patient advocate. If you are wondering what this entire podcast is about, today, I'm going to be talking about why I started sharing my story and how that has affected me in the overall journey of chronic illness. I started sharing my story in September of 2018 when I was diagnosed because we were across the country from our family and friends. And I was in the hospital and I was trying to answer text messages and phone calls, but I just didn't have the capacity to respond to everybody. So, social media was just the easiest way to keep everybody updated. When I was diagnosed, I was in the hospital. And obviously, what happens when you are diagnosed in the hospital? You Google your symptoms, you Google the diagnosis that you just received, and you go down a rabbit hole. And that's pretty much what I did. So I started diagnosing myself and I started looking at all of the things that I was experiencing. And when they told me what my diagnosis was, I pretty much had already self diagnosed myself. And when I was in the hospital and I was spiraling, I was very alone. My husband was home taking care of the kids, and we didn't really have any family around. So it was just pure chaos for the most part. And in the hospital during diagnosis and being alone, my doctor came in and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know that there is a girl that lives here. She lives in town. And we told her about your story. You guys have very similar stories and you're on the same treatment. And we told her about you and she wants to meet you." And I said, "Sure." I was sitting in the hospital. I didn't really have anything else to do. So I was like, sure, why not? And so she came in, and it's funny because I haven't talked to her in a really long time. I honestly don't even know how she's doing. She doesn't have social media, so she has no idea that I talk about her all the time. But she was such a pivotal moment for me. She came to the hospital that day. She strolled in. She was wearing her book bag. She had her pump inside of her book bag. And they had just started me on this pump treatment. And I was having a really hard time seeing myself, one, connected to this pump for the rest of my life, but two, just really seeing myself outside of the four walls of that hospital room. And I say it all the time, but she really helped me mentally get over the hurdle that I was having. And she walked in and she was such a great representation of what life could look like once I got out. And I honestly don't know if I would be here sharing my story with you and in the level of confidence that I'm having now had she not come to the hospital that day. She really was a big impact for me, and I was so thankful for her. She and I stayed connected while we lived in Colorado. She came over to the house, she helped me do all these things. She just pretty much just helped me get used to what I was dealing with. And it was so cool because she was the only person I had known with my condition. When I was looking for somebody online, I couldn't really find anybody in the space at the time and really nobody that was sharing helpful information. And so she really was my rock during the time of diagnosis and starting on a pump and doing all of this new treatment therapy. She basically just helped me understand that I could live a life and that my life could still be good. She really just made me realize how important it was that there was a beacon of hope for this community, but also for just every disease space community. So I wanted to be that girl for somebody. I wanted to show somebody that it was okay to be diagnosed and that you could, in fact, live a life outside of those hospital doors. Advocacy has helped me so much mentally and emotionally. It has changed the game for me. When I was sharing my story after she came in, it really just was cathartic for me. I think that I have always been a writer. I've always been a big talker. I'm a verbal processor. And so sharing my story online just kind of felt natural for me, but it really was for me. And I say this a lot that I am not sharing for anybody else at the end of the day. Sharing helps me document my journey and also helps me look back and realize how far I've come. But advocacy has also helped me emotionally and mentally because I have met so many people in the community online that has changed the game for me. It is honestly one of those things where you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but it is amazing that you can look out into the ethernet and see people who are dealing with the same conditions as you. I have met so many amazing girls in this journey who have become real life friends that I've met in person who are the only people that could understand what I'm dealing with when I am emotionally exhausted or when I get a bad test result. They are the only ones that could really relate to me. And there's so much beauty in being able to find somebody that you can relate to. It is important to have people that can understand what you are going through and can be there when you need somebody to talk to. Because I love my husband, but he cannot always understand exactly what it is that this emotional toll about this condition has on me. So it is important for me to be able to release those emotions, release those feelings to somebody that really can understand. I do talk to my husband about a lot of stuff, but he can only relate so much because he's not dealing with his condition. So, my husband and I have been watching Balin Out Loud on HBO. And if you do not know who I'm talking about, she is amazing. I'm genuinely obsessed with her. Balin, if you are listening to this by some odd chance, I would love to be your friend. I am so obsessed with her. I think she's so funny, but she is an influencer on TikTok who has Tourette's. And she started sharing her journey on TikTok. Now she has a show and she is so authentic. And I think that there's so much beauty in the authenticness of influencers, especially in the chronic disease space. Social media tends to be so fake. It tends to be such a highlight reel that people with chronic illness often compare themselves when it comes to social media because you're watching everybody's highlight reel. You're seeing people out living their lives, and you are not seeing somebody who is authentically struggling. And I think what Balin does, which is great, is that she does not hide who she is. And I love that. But the episode that we watched last night was so emotional. She talked about how lonely she felt in her condition. She lives in a not very big town in West Virginia. She said she doesn't have a lot of friends and she had a really hard time making friends. And it was so emotional to watch because I can totally relate in some situations where when you are diagnosed and you feel lonely, it broke my heart because she was so upset at this conference that she was at because she just didn't feel like she was enough and that being at conference was important to her because she was able to be around people who were just like her. And that's the beauty of being at a conference for your disease space is that you get to meet people who are exactly like you in some capacity and dealing with the same situations that you are. She talked about how she knows that she loves God and that she loves Jesus and that she knows that Jesus made her this way, but she still didn't feel like enough because of her condition. And it honestly, it broke my heart in two. And there's so much emotional stuff that goes on with chronic illness. There's so much mental that like you just couldn't understand unless you were in it. And I really felt for her in that moment because I know what it's like to be in my 20s, young adults, hey. And I know what it's like to deal with a chronic illness in your 20s and just be different than everybody else. And there is so much heartbreak in having a life that you imagined and then having a life that you're actually living. And it is such a hard reality to know that the life that you envisioned is not exactly the life that you're going to be living. At the conference, Balin talks about how she wants to continue to just show people that this is what life looks like with her disease. And like showing up and showing up authentically is so important. And having a community is so important, and that's something that she was talking about that she really strives for. Having a community in my journey has been so important because I have done so many different things because of my community. For example, when I had to go back on pump. So at one point in my journey, I went from IV to an oral medication and then back to pump. And during that second pump transition, I was having such a hard time on oral medication. And we found out that I was actually not doing well and needed to go back on pump in order to be stable again. And I was debating because I'd had such a hard time on the IV. I was so sick. I was in the hospital 6 times in a year, like, so once every other month, and I just couldn't keep my skin from reacting, but we knew that pump was the answer, and I actually met a girl, Heather, on social media, and she had posted videos about being on the sub-Q pump, and I had heard about it at the time, but I did not quite understand it, and so she actually reached out to me on social media and said, "Hey, if you're considering going back to pump, like, why don't you consider the sub-Q pump?" And then she actually sent me all of these videos, like, all of these tutorials, like, how she does things, how she wears it, and I was like, "I mean, I guess there's a lot of benefit there." I asked my doctor about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I think that could be a great option for you." And especially with my skin, it was really important that I was able to move my site and not keep it in one place like you do on an IV. And so I started on sub-Q because of Heather. Really, she is the only person that I knew who was doing it and posting about it or wasn't scared to send me videos and show me how she was doing things. And it was so important because, like, when you start a treatment that you don't understand, it is like learning from a fire hose, but a fire hose in which it affects your entire life. Because I'm on life sustaining medication, it is a big deal to get it right and to get it right the first time. So I am so thankful that I started on pump. And I'm also thankful for Heather, who to this day is still helping me with stuff, who also just got off pump. Congratulations. Love you, love you. And I'm so happy for her, but I wouldn't have known to do any of the stuff that I'm doing now without her. And then also, I met a girl on social media named Jenna. Love you, Jenna, who told me about Dupixent. And if you guys don't know, I have crazy skin. I'm genuinely allergic to almost everything. And I am seeing an allergist now, thanks to Jenna, but I'm also on Dupixent, which is an injectable medication that helps alleviate the adhesive reaction that I'm having to my skin because of my sites, because I'm allergic to all of the adhesives that I'm on. And when she started on Dupixent, she was like, "Yeah, I think it's been a game changer." She was like, "You should give it a try." And so I was trying all of these other things and nothing was working. Like, pretty much everything I was doing was I was overdosing on all these antihistamine oral medications and still nothing was working. So I went to an allergist and I talked to her about Dupixent and she said, "Yeah, I think that's a great option for you." And it has literally changed the game for my sub-Q life because now I'm barely reacting to the adhesives at all. And that's because I met somebody online who recommended it. And then lastly, I will talk about Shanna and Chelsea, probably in the same breath. Love you guys. Shanna and Chelsea are two PH girls that I love. When I first heard about sotatercept, the clinical trial drug that I'm on, Chelsea and I talked about it. We talked about how it could be a game changer, how it could be such a light of hope for all of the people in this community that are struggling and are just holding on. And Chelsea and I really dove into it. We, like, talked about it. I, like, cried. I think Chelsea cried just thinking about the concept that this drug could be so important. And then when the sotatercept trial became a thing, I had multiple people reach out and say, "Hey, you should probably try this trial. It sounds like a really cool drug." I realized that it was the drug Chelsea and I had talked about. But then I was nervous about clinical trial. And I think that society puts this negative connotation on clinical trials. And I thought, I'm not sick enough to need to be on a clinical trial. But I knew a girl, Shanna, who had been doing multiple clinical trials. And so I reached out and I said, "Hey, can you tell me about your clinical trial? Tell me, like, all of the things. Tell me all the negatives and all the positives." And she really put my mind at ease. And after talking to her, I told my doctor, "Hey, there's this clinical trial. I would really like to try it if you think that we could get me into it. And I did. And I got into it because somebody told me online to start it. And Shanna made me feel better about starting clinical trial. And then I started a clinical trial, and my life has never been the same since. It has been life changing for me. Clinical trial has really given me a lot of years back. And with a progressive disease, I will take any amount of time back that I can get. So I say all of this to say that social media and social media advocacy has literally changed my life. And it is only because I was brave enough to get out there and share my story and be open to the criticism, but also be open to the fact that maybe patients know a little better sometimes. So, living with a condition and meeting people who are doing the same things as you and also who are on treatments that you are on is incredibly important because you can only learn so much from a brochure or an infomercial or a very small clip of somebody else living with it. Being able to talk to people who are really doing what you're doing and be able to give you tips, like real life tips, is so important. Doctors and nurses training you is also very important, but it is completely different when someone is living with the condition, living with the treatment that you're on, and doing it every day. It is so important to see what it could look like for you, but also just to gather information, right? And the girls that I've talked about are such big parts of my story, and honestly, they probably have no idea that I was gonna talk about them, but it has been such a game changer, and I'm so thankful for every one of you. I'm also thankful for everybody in this community. I hope that you can find community for yourself. I do genuinely believe that God made it so that we were people who needed each other. I believe that God created us for community, and I hope that you are brave enough to put yourself out there. Maybe not share your story if you're not comfortable with that, but reach out to somebody in the comments. If you see that they said, "Oh, I have this condition," or "I have these multiple comorbidities that you have," in a comment section, reach out and say, "Hey, me too." Sometimes that "me too" is just the beginning of a beautiful friendship, and you never know who God is placing in your life to change your life for the better. Honestly, it is worth it. At the end of the day, making a community, sharing your story, advocating is so important, and I promise that it's worth it. So if you liked this episode, please like it, comment, and subscribe. I love you guys. I'm so thankful for you. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.